Joining us now, MSNBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian, New York Times chief White House correspondent, and MSNBC political analyst Peter Baker, host of The Bulwark, love that word, podcast, writer at large, and MSNBC political analyst Tim Miller, and former North Dakota senator and director at the University of Chicago Institute of Politics, Heidi Heitkamp. All right, Ken. So we're talking about this because we're now seeing this begin in action, this idea of retribution, the effort toward retribution. And it began on Friday, just before 7 in the morning at John Bolton's home. We've had the weekend to chew it over. What's the latest today?
Yes, and of course, Katie, we don't know for a fact that what happened to John Bolton was the result of retribution by Donald Trump, because we don't know what underlies that investigation and that FBI search of his house. After all, a judge had to approve that warrant, perhaps two judges. But we do know that Bolton had already been the target of retribution because Donald Trump pulled his security detail, even though the intelligence community says that his life is under threat from the Iranians. And we know that there's a whole list of people. Donald Trump has an enemies list, and he's been acting on it. He's been executing on it. And it goes to, for example, John Brennan and James Comey, the former CIA director and the former FBI director, who it's been reported are under criminal investigation right now based on referrals made by Donald Trump's intelligence chiefs. And Barack Obama may figure in that investigation somehow. And then you have these lesser figures who aren't household names, people like Miles Taylor and Christopher Krebs. Remember, Donald Trump identified them in executive orders that were read out in the Oval Office, and they are under some kind of government investigation or inquiry based really on no evidence of any wrongdoing. But the most important thing that viewers need to understand, we've said this before on your air, but that Donald Trump and his administration has shattered the tradition that grew up in response to Watergate, a 50-year tradition. It was a norm. It was not a law that the Justice Department and the FBI would operate independently, particularly when it comes to individual criminal investigations and charging decisions from the White House. And that norm became so refined that there were policies about which particular White House officials could communicate with which senior Justice Department officials, and it was very limited. And, you know, the Trump folks accused the Biden administration of weaponizing the Justice Department, but I covered the Biden Justice Department, and Merrick Garland didn't even want to be seen in a room with Joe Biden. He took pains to be separated from the White House, to the point where the White House was not very happy with Merrick Garland for most of Joe Biden's term. And people who cover the White House, people who cover the DOJ, they know that very well. So the Justice Department was not weaponized in the Biden administration, but it sure looks like it's being weaponized now in a way that Richard Nixon really never dreamed of, Katie.
Yeah, you know, and Peter, as I laid out, I mean, Donald Trump has just blown through any norm. He's brash, he's bullish, he refuses to bend, refuses to kowtow, refuses to say he's wrong. And now he's not only doing that, but he's lined up a number of loyalists around him, people that are willing to do the things that he maybe not is directly asking them to do, but the things that they know he wants them to do. That's how Michael Cohen has always put it. Nixon ran up against his own administration. He ran up against his DOJ, who said, we're not going to do this. And he had to go through a number, you know, the Saturday Night Massacre, firing a number of members of the DOJ before he could find somebody to carry out his orders. This, by doing it out in the open and doing it without apology and having the friendly news outlets there to cushion it, to rewrite it, to spin it, and then the party there to just get in line, this is different.
Yeah, it is different. I mean, look, Richard Nixon obviously had his own dark side, and he had his enemies list, and he used the instruments of power to go after them, right? He authorized the burglary of Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office in order to get dirt on Daniel Ellsberg because he had angered Nixon over Vietnam. He did all kinds of things like that. But the difference was that he understood you weren't supposed to be doing out in public. You're supposed to hide that kind of thing. That was the reason he got pushed out of office, was with a cover-up. There's no cover-up here. What's going on with this president is out in the open. He's not really making much of a pretense that this is anything other than retribution. Look what we saw just in the last few days, right? We saw FBI agents at John Bolton's house just days after Bolton was all over television criticizing Donald Trump's handling of the Alaska summit with Vladimir Putin and the meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky in Washington. We saw the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency fired just weeks after his agency contradicted Trump's version of what happened with the Iran nuclear strikes. We saw just yesterday the president of the United States say on social media that he was really angry at Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, a one-time ally of his. He didn't like what Christie was saying on television, and therefore maybe he should reopen an investigation into a 12-year-old matter involving Christie, very openly saying that because Christie criticized him, Christie should be investigated. This is not secret. This is not hidden. This is right out in the open. When Elon Musk turned on Donald Trump, Trump said, hey, maybe I should take away all of his federal contracts. In other words, he is willing to not only use the instruments of power of government, which are supposed to be neutral and not political weaponry, he's willing to use them as weapons, and he's willing to basically make clear that he's using them as weapons.
Let's play the moment this morning from Donald Trump asked about Chris Christie and asked about whether he's actually going to investigate him, as he intimated over the weekend. Here's what he said.
Chris is a slob. Everybody knows it. I know Chris better than anybody in the room. I always felt he was guilty. But what he did is he took the George Washington Bridge, which is very serious. He closed down the George Washington Bridge. And you had medical people, you had ambulances caught up. This thing was closed down. And obviously he knew about it. When I listened to Chris speak his hate, I say, oh, what about the George Washington Bridge? Tell me about the George Washington Bridge. He blamed other people, but he knew all about it. So no, I don't know if they want to look at it. It's not for me. If they want to look at it, they can. You could ask Pam. I think we have other things to do, but I always thought he got away with murder.
It's my honor this morning to introduce somebody who is a real standout. He's been my friend for many years. He's been a spectacular governor. He's been just a wonderful person and a wonderful, loyal person.
So we cut those two things together because here's Donald Trump saying he always knew that he was guilty and that he had committed a crime there. And, Chris Christie is terrible, but it was only a few short years ago that Chris Christie was wonderful and a great loyalist and a great governor. And he wanted him as a man, a part of his campaign. So there's always a hypocrisy there. As long as you are useful to me, I will keep you close. And as long as you're not useful to me, I will push you away. The question, I guess, Tim, is this more than just a cudgel? Is it more than just intimidation? Is he saying this about Chris Christie just to get Chris Christie to stop, to be quiet? Or is there something there? And can we point to John Bolton as a reason to believe that there is perhaps more to this?
Well, it's definitely intimidation. And I think that it's not just intimidating Chris Christie, though, or trying to, but intimidate other people who might speak out about this. And look, Trump is good at a few certain things. He's good at an insult that you saw there. He's good at picking unsympathetic foes. There's not a huge base of goodwill for Chris Christie or John Bolton, frankly. And I think that Trump knows that. But like the scary part about this is that in both of these cases, like these are long, unless there's something new about John Bolton, I don't think there's any reason to. I think people assume that this is related to the book investigation from a few years ago. But these are old cases that they're bringing back up just to go after political foes and to send a message to people that they shouldn't speak out against this administration, or they might use, the Justice Department, the federal government, to go after them. And maybe that won't mean an actual indictment, but being investigated, having your house raided while your wife is there in the morning, like that is punishment in itself. Having to get lawyers, having to defend yourself, that's a punishment in itself. They're doing it purposefully. And I think this goes without saying based on that video you showed, Katie, but just to be explicit about it, there's no imaginable way if John Bolton or Chris Christie had stayed in Donald Trump's good graces and supported him in 2024, that their house would be raided in the case of John Bolton, or that Trump would be floating an investigation against them. He's not doing this to Mark Meadows or the other people from Trump 1.0 who have stayed loyal to him. And so it's obviously on its face a political attack and an intimidation tactic.
Let me tee you up, Heidi, with this from the Wall Street Journal editorial board on Donald Trump's vendetta, talking about the Bolton raid specifically. They say the real offender here is a president who seems to think he can use the powers of his office to run vendettas. We said this was one of the risks of a second Trump term, and it's turning out to be worse than we imagined. Is that the take you believe from your fellow former lawmakers? Do they believe that things are going well? Or are they happy with this, or are they getting nervous?
Well, I don't know what Republicans in the Senate are thinking to allow this to continue. You know, Trump learned the lesson of the last administration, his first term, when he had Bill Barr who put guardrails up. He had people like Gary Cohn who put guardrails up. He had people like Chris Christie who was willing to say no. And when people say no to Trump and he gets his feelings hurt, this is what he does. You know, I think it's really interesting if you think you're going to intimidate Chris Christie. I know a little bit about him, and number one, his IQ points would double or triple the top 3 people right now in the Justice Department, and so I'm sure it's bring it on. Plus, Trump actually tweeted when the unanimous decision came out on behalf Bridgegate, saying there was no there was no prosecution that was appropriate. He said that's a good idea. I think the real danger here that everyone's missing is the frustration the Democrats had with Merrick Garland and how he ran the Justice Department, saying you should have been much more aggressive. How do we put this back? How do we put the genie back in the bottle when you have Trump so blazing, you know, just it's brazen what he's doing with the Department of Justice, and there is going to be, again, a norm that's broken, and how do you put it back? And so I think that you can't just look at Donald Trump and say, God, please just get us through the next 3 years. You've got to look at what's the permanent damage to the Department of Justice.
If you get a chance to put it back.